The Sikorsky ilya muromets were a class of Russia pre-World War One large four-engine commercial airliner and heavy military bomber during World War One, used by the Russian Empire. The aircraft series was designed after Ilya Muromets, a hero of Slavic mythology. The series was based on the Ruski Velitska Legranda, the world's first four-engine aircraft designed by Igor Sikorsky. The Ilya Muromets aircraft appeared in a 1913 airshow with a revolutionary design. Intended for commercial service, it was very spacious and had a very spacious fuselage, incorporating a passenger saloon, a washroom, and even a bathroom on board. The Ilya Muromets Sikorsky S-22 was designed and constructed by Igor Sikorsky at the Russo-Baltic Cartridge Factory in St. Petersburg in 1913. It was based on the earlier S-21 Rusko Velitska, which started out as a twin-engine Legrand as the twin Tamin engines Boshli Boskakra before placing all four of the Boshlik engines in the tractor configuration, along with the lower wing leading to the edge to create the Rusko Velitska, which had played an important part in the role of development for the Russian aviation and the multi-engine aircraft industry of the world. Russia had a chance to become the birthplace of the first multi-passenger, multi-engine airliner. The Ilya Muromets was first conceived and built as a luxurious aircraft. For the first time in aviation history, it was installed a passenger saloon, comfortable wicker chairs, and a bathroom, a lounge, and even the first airborne toilets. The aircraft had an heating and electrical setting as well. The S-22 cockpit was very spacious and had sufficient space, allowing for several people to observe the pilot. Opening both sides of the fuselage permitted a mechanic to climb out into the lower wings to service the engines before flying, and during flight as well. Further back was a private cabin which included a brief, a small table, and a cabinet. Lighting was provided by wind-driven generators, and heating was supplied by two long engine exhaust pipes which passed through the corners of the cabin. Despite many advancements, the flight instruments of the Ilya Muromets were primitive. This included four tactometers, one pre-engine, a compass, a crude oilometer and speed indicator, two glass V-shaped tubes and a ball of bank indicators, a series of horizontal bars situated vertically on the lows of the fuselage for measuring climbs and descents. Later, the bomber would have variants, a drift indicator and an elementary bombing sight was added for air bombing. In January 1914, the Ilya Muromets No. 107 flew for the first time. On the 11th of February 1914, the second prototype took off for its first demonstration flight with 16 passengers aboard, making a record for the number of passengers carried. From the 30th of June to the 12th of July 1914, it set the world record for making a trip from St. Petersburg to Kiev, a distance of about 1,200 kilometers and back. The first leg was about 14 hours and 38 minutes, with one landing for fuel in Ustra, and the one return with a fuel stop in Novodosk took even less time, about 13 hours. The acclaim received by Sikorsky, including Tsar Nicholas II presenting him with the Order of St. Vladimir, 4th degree, arranging for an exemption from the wartime draft to allow to continue his design work, and the promise of the grant for 100,000 rubles from the State Duma. During an imperial military review of the Korsnest in July, Tsar Nicholas II decorated and christened the Ilya Muromets Type B military prototype No. 108, the Kievsky. During tests, the Ilya Muromets were fitted with both skis and pontoons and an amphi-compensator for the new variants being produced. If it had not been for World War I, the Ilya Muromets would have probably started passenger flights that same year. With the beginning of World War I, the Sikorsky was encouraged by the results of the proven flights to redesign the aircraft to become the military Ilya Muromets Type V, the world's first purpose-designed bomber. The new heavy bomber was slightly smaller and lighter than the Type A. Internal racks carried about 800 kilograms of bombs, and 9 positions for 9 machine guns were added in self-defense for various locations. The Muromets in the S-25 Generation 2 variant, March 1916, was the first aircraft in history to incorporate a tail gunner position. The engine was protected by a 5mm thick armor. The military version was designed expressly for long-range flying for both bombing and reconnaissance roles. When war broke out, only 2 Ilya Muromets bombers were completed out of the initial production of 10 aircraft. In August 1914, the Ilya Muromets was introduced into the Russian Imperial Air Service, and on December 10, 1914, the Russians formed their own first 10-bomber squadron. slowly increased their numbers by 20 in mid-1916. Operations with the heavy bombers began on the 12th of February 1915 with the raid of German frontline positions. During World War I, the Germans often relucted to attack ilya muromets in the air due to their defensive firepower, including the unique tail gun position. Once engaged, small fighters also found that they were buffeted by propeller wash. On the 12th of September 1916, the Russians lost their first ilya muromets in a fight with 4 German albatrosses, 3 of which managed to shoot it down. This was the only loss to enemy action during the war. 3 others were damaged in combat, but they made it home and returned to base for repairs. The Russians built 83 ilya muromets bombers between 1913 and 1918. During this period, they were the first in aviation history to perform bombing from heavy bombers, with bomber groups and raids on enemy targets, night bombing and photographic bomb damage assessment. They were also the first to develop defensive tactics for a single bomber engaged in air combat with several enemy fighters. Due to systematic weapon upgrades, the effectiveness of the bomb dropping reached a total of 90% accuracy. The ilya muromets performed more than 400 sorties and dropped more than 65 tons of bombs during the war. By 1917, attrition from constant flying had reduced the bombing fleet substantially, and only 4 bombers remained on the front line. The other ilya muromets were regarded to the training duties. The heavy bombers from participants appeared in 1916 resembled the Russian pioneer of the certain degree. The Russian government and Sikorsky himself sold the design and the production license to the British and French governments. The Germans tried to copy its design using the frames and the fragments from the ilya muromets they shot down in 1916 over their territory in September 1916, and by the end of 1916 the design was generally believed to be at the end of its development cycle, with ensuing modifications to the individual aircraft such as additional armor and weapons, making the aircraft actually too heavy and not suitable for operational use. Continual changes to the field as well made the factory led to more aircraft being redesigned for new variants. Further designs based on the original ilya muromets bombers included a more dedicated attack version. Following the February Revolution of 1917, the ilya muromets bombers continued to fly with the Russian Imperial Army, but others were seized from the provisional government, with pilots also defecting to the Ukrainian squadron of the Hetman, and the General Pavlo Sikorsky was the last one of the ilya muromets being flown by Polish forces. The ilya muromets continued its production after the war, with a handful still being produced. From May to October 1921, the aircraft was neutralized for its original intended purpose as a passenger transport from Moscow to Krakow line. 6 survivors continued to fly in the service in civilian passenger airlines, and it was also used as a mail plane. After carrying 60 passengers and 2 tons of freight, the ilya muromets were considered too difficult to maintain, as the engines and the airframe were too worn out, and by the 10th of October 1922, the airliners were retired. The last flight of the ilya muromets bomber took place in 1922 at the Air Shooting and Bomb Dropping School of Sepulkonova.